Good morning, and welcome to Assessment Today. I'm Chip Gordon. As you know, the Occupy Assessment movement has entered its second day. The purpose of this movement, we think, is to bring an awareness to the nation about the importance of valid assessment. We continue our live coverage with Cadillac Michaels on the scene.
Thanks, Chip. As you know, the members of the Occupy Assessment movement, where people from all across the spectrum of assessmentology are here to express their thoughts on assessment. I have Kent Forsyth from the Formative Assessment Defense Society right here with me. Kent, why are you out here today?
Well, Geraldo, as part of the Formative Assessment Defense Society, I believe that assessment should be constant and ongoing. By conducting formative assessment throughout the process of learning, a teacher is better able to assess the learning of his students. As Stiggins always says, the greatest potential value of classroom assessment is realized when we open up the process during the learning and welcome students in as full partners.
Thank you, Kent. It truly seems that formative assessment is an important part of the assessment process. Back to you in the studio, Chip.
Thank you, Cadillac. Here in the studio we have Justin Gray, a high school English teacher, to comment on the Occupy Assessment movement. What do you think about formative assessment, Justin?
I think formative assessment is very important. Of course, there are lots of aspects to formative assessment, such as checks for understanding, journals, logs, entrance and exit slips, and even checklists and reflections. These are all very important aspects when it comes to assessing student learning while learning is taking place. As an English teacher, formative assessment allows me to see how my students are doing before their final assessment and gives me ideas on how I can adjust my instruction to meet the student's individual needs. You know, as Burke says, if the assessment is ongoing and frequent, immediate changes can be made to help the student achieve the desired outcome. Formative assessment does have its problems though, Chip. Formative assessment doesn't always put everything that a student needs to know together. And since formative assessments should not be graded, they're difficult to use to show a student's growth over time.
Well, I think I'm beginning to understand the rationale behind formative assessment, but how would you use this in, let's say, an English classroom?
Glad you asked, Chip. Formative assessment certainly has its place in the English classroom. Actually, it has a place in any classroom. I would have my students keep a journal or log of their reflections on activities. It is important for students to reflect on their learning. As Stiggins says in his book, we must prepare our students to be lifelong assessors of the quality of their own reasoning. I would also use tools such as the most important thing and the muddiest point as ways of assessing my students as we go along.
Now, it is important to note that there is a subsect of the Formative Assessment Defense Society called the Checks for Understanding League.
Oh yes, Checks for Understanding are very important. We're very thankful that the Checks for Understanding League has been so active in the assessment community.
The Checks for Understanding League recently created a short PSA. Let's take a look.
Since the beginning of time, checks for understanding have been a part of our lives. Even in gladiatorial times, thumbs up, thumbs down was used. Of course, it was to determine the fate of those who opposed the Emperor, but that's a minor deviation.
Hello, my name is Chet Checkley, President of the Checks for Understanding League, a subsect of the Formative Assessment Defense Society. For years, checks for understanding have not been given the respect and education that they deserve. Our great leader Stiggins has written that you cannot validly assess academic achievement targets that you have not precisely or completely defined. So it's important to consistently check for students' understanding in order to be sure that expectations are defined and that students know what they are supposed to do. Let me now show you some checks for understanding. Of course, there are thumbs up, thumbs down, and thumbs in the middle. This is very simple. There are also red, yellow, and green cups. These help students show if they understand or are having trouble. Then we have yes/no cards. And finally, whiteboards, which can be used to ask students questions, and the students can hold them up. Remember, checks for understanding are one of the most important aspects of assessment. If you can catch a problem early, you can take care of it. Check for understanding and save a life. We done? We done here? My mustache stitches. We done? Can I stop pointing at the thing? Yeah? Alright, well, I just want to make sure you were done. Okay. Yeah, good. Check for understanding? Yeah, sure. Good. Right.
I agree with everything they say there. In my classroom, I would use all these types of checks for understanding and maybe even more to see how my students are doing. It's important to ask if my students understand throughout the lesson so that I don't lose anyone and I know what I need to reteach. Combined with entrance and exit slips, I'll have a better grasp on where my students are at on a continuous basis. The only problems here with checks for understanding is that they cannot be used to truly see how a student is understanding, only how a student thinks he is understanding. A teacher must be sure to keep in his mind, but even though it has its limitations, I'm a huge proponent of checks for understanding.
Well, formative assessment and checks for understanding certainly sound like important tools for teachers to use. Today's episode is sponsored by the Background Knowledge Measurement Bureau. The BKNB asks you, have you been pre-assessed lately? We'll be back after a word about pre-assessment.
Do you suffer from a lack of background knowledge? Have trouble grasping the basics? Are you full of misunderstandings that you just don't seem to be able to conquer? Now there's help. With pre-assessments, your teacher will be able to assess your background knowledge and address your misunderstandings.
But how do I do that? Whoa! A KWL chart! Awesome! Sweet! A knowledge rating! Yes! An entrance slip! This will show my teacher what I know! Whoa! Bell ringer! Radical! My favorite! A multiple intelligence inventory! Now my teacher will know how I learn best! I love pre-assessments!
Since Burke states that assessment is a global term for gathering information for the purpose of decision-making, then pre-assessments give teachers the insight they need in order to provide the best possible instruction that fits in the needs of their students. While pre-assessments are excellent, it is important to note that these are not a substitute for ongoing checks for understanding. While information on differentiation may emerge, the results of this test are not enough. A proper differentiation strategy must be enacted in order to fully take advantage of pre-assessments. Void where prohibited.
Welcome back to assessment today. Let's go back to Cadillac on the street at the Occupy assessment protest. Cadillac?
Hi, Chip. As the hours have passed, the Occupy assessment protest has been heating up. Assessmentologists are mingling with the common people to share with them the importance of all types of assessment. I have Witten Holmes here with me. Mr. Holmes, why are you here at Occupy assessment?
But soft, what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fast.
Excuse me, Mr. Holmes. I thought you were here for Occupy assessment. Occupy Hackneyed Theater Tropes is 2 blocks over.
I am here for Occupy assessment. This is an assessment.
But how is this an assessment?
I am a performer, and this is my product, Cadillac. This is an authentic or alternative assessment in action. I am evidencing my understanding by performing an authentic task that is relatable to real-life contexts. You see, Burke always says that performance tasks require students to apply their knowledge and skills in order to solve problems, create original products, or demonstrate particular skills.
Ah, and now it makes sense. Back to you, Chip.
Thank you, Cadillac. We'll check in with you later. Let's ask our guest, Justin Gray, what he thinks about products and performances. Justin, how would you use these in a classroom?
Well, Chip, there are a lot of different ways of having students present products and performances. There are speeches, readers' theater, presentations, graphic organizers, grasps activities, the list goes on. In my English classroom, I would have students do some creative writing, readers' theater, and presentations. Of course, these would all be tied in an authentic way to what we were studying.
Are there any downfalls to products and performances as assessments?
Burke says that one of the challenges of assessing performance tasks is subjectivity, and I think she's right. It is difficult to grade such performances. The other problems are that it's very easy to create activities for the sake of creating activities, but these authentic assessments must be rooted in the goals of the unit, or else they're nothing more than fun activities.
You say that grading is often a challenge when it comes to authentic assessment. How would you grade these?
Well, no question that I'd use rubrics. Stiggins says that the key instructional challenge is to be sure students have the opportunity to learn and understand the rules, generalizations, or principles we want them to apply. Then rubrics are perfect because they take a great deal of the subjectivity out of the grading process, says Burke.
Rubrics are becoming very popular, it seems. In fact, there has been a lot of commercialization of the rubric these days. Let's take a look at an ad for one of these products.
Hey kids! Tired of all your video games and other toys? Well, now there's a new toy on the block. The Rubrix Cube! With the Rubrix Cube, you have the assessment power of the rubric in your hands!
Wow! Nice essay! Let's check out this analytical rubric with graded performance values for various criteria! Awesome! Great presentation! Let's check the Rubrix Cube Holistic Edition to serve as a checklist of criteria. Did you meet expectations or are you not there yet?
Teachers all across the nation are going crazy for the Rubrix Cube. Buy one for only $19.99 and get the Holistic Edition for free. Only shipping and handling apply.
Great product. Burke says that a rubric defines the completeness and quality or development in a process, product, or performance, therefore supporting learning. So I think this is wonderful. I would use the two types of rubrics for most of my English classroom activities.
Another type of product that I think deserves special attention is the portfolio. What do you think, Justin?
Oh yeah, portfolios are great too, and they fit right in. Portfolios are a collection of student work which represents the growth of a student over time, or a collection of that student's best work. It's a great tool to use to help students see the progressions that they're making. As Burke always says, portfolios allow students to examine their own work and reflect on their learning. There are lots of different types of portfolios, but I would most certainly use a process folio in my own class in order to show the growth of student work. The other way we could use portfolios is having conferences. Stiggins talks at length about different types of conferences as a way to keep students accountable for their own learning, and I really like the idea. When students understand what meeting and exceeding standards involves, then they become more critical and reflective of their own performances. I could certainly see using student-led parent conferences in my classroom.
It seems we've gone over quite a few different assessments today, but there is one that we haven't covered yet. Let me introduce our guest, direct from London, England, Dr. Nigel Essaystein, Associate Professor of Summative Assessment at the Oxford School of Assessment. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Essaystein.
Pleasure to be here.
Dr. Essaystein, what exactly does a Professor of Summative Assessment do?
Quite simply, Chip, I am a summative assessment theorist. A summative assessment, as best coined by Burke in her excellent tome, How to Assess Authentic Learning, is a term used to grade or make final judgment about what the student has learned at the end of instruction. So, summative assessments include end-of-unit tests, selected response questions, and matching. Quite simply, summative assessments are tests much like the Regents exams or New York State assessments,
They are an important part of any assessment package.
The understanding is that some people don't like many of the summative assessment methods. Justin, I understand you have some reservations?
Yes, I do, Chip. With all due respect, Dr. S.A. Steen, I find most summative assessments to be merely a rehashing of knowledge with little or no activation of the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Not to mention the ethical issues surrounding state or national assessments and their relationship to how teachers may be assessed in the future. Again, I'm not saying that all summative assessment is bad. It's completely necessary. But I have concerns over how such exams affect student morale and groupings, and I wonder whether or not the results of the test provide evidence of understanding.
You bring up some interesting points, Justin, but how can we tell what students have learned?
Nigel, I'm not saying I see no use in summative assessments, but I'm just worried about the effects the results can have on student dispositions. Stiggins says that we should never underestimate the power of our evaluations on student performance and the impact of our feedback on learning success and students' sense of control. If we put too much credence in what these tests tell us, we risk alienating our students and making them feel like they have no chance of succeeding.
But certainly you'd use summative assessments in your classroom.
Oh, absolutely. I think essays are an important part of any ELA curriculum. I don't think that multiple choice has much of a place in English, but I think that some constructed response questions can be useful for guiding students a little more than an open-ended essay question would.
It seems that we have learned that summative assessments are necessary, but you truly do have to be careful with them.
Well, obviously they're needed for grading purposes, but many of the methods currently used are problematic in many ways.
I respectfully disagree. I believe that summative assessments are the most important of assessments.
I'm sorry, Dr. S.A. Steen, but the best is a balanced approach to assessment. Stiggins says that students can hit any target that they see and that holds still for them. And in order to do so, we must use a balanced portfolio of all these assessment types to keep students understanding what their goals are while learning in addition to a summative analysis. Through checks for understanding and pre-assessments, a teacher is able to glean from students what their trouble areas are in order to teach directly to them to enhance achievement.
Looks like we have some breaking news from Occupy Assessment. Let's go to Cadillac Michaels.
Thanks, Chip. It looks like all the various sets of assessment techniques have started dissipating. It seems like they suddenly came to the conclusion that each one of their respective assessment types is valuable when used in the big picture of assessment. It's a true kumbaya moment, Chip. Really beautiful watching formative holding hands with summative, seeing checks for understanding sitting along with portfolios in authentic assessment. Brings a tear to your eye. Not mine. I had my tear ducts removed 10 years ago, but I have that ache in the corner of my eye that signifies that if I could cry, I would. It's beautiful. Back to you, Chip.
Thank you, Cadillac. Sorry about your tear ducts. Looks like we're out of time for today. I'd like to thank our guests, Justin Gray and Dr. Nigel S.A. Steen, for being with us today. On behalf of all of us at Assessment Today, remember, both the alphabet and assessment start with A. It's the foundation of any learning experience. Good night.
Mom, I'm hungry! Whoa!
Assessmenos! Don't start your day without them. Assessmenos are part of a balanced assessment.
I love that formative crunch.
Assessmenos features a delectable combination of formative crunch, summative tart, and portfolio berries with 100% of your daily value of checks for understanding and authentic assessment.
Authentic assessment is good for my bones!
If you love Assessmenos, don't forget to try Honey Rubric Assessmenos covered in holistic and analytic flakes.
Yum! I love Honey Rubric. It helps me know what I need to do to achieve.
Assessmenos. Feed your mind with assessment.